When an empire declines or a nation declines, is past its prime, what is going to happen? The hegemon defends its role increasingly aggressively. And then we have multipolarity, maybe instability, maybe war. So we're clearly at phase 4, 5 now. He's dreaming of getting it in order by imposing tariffs, but about very, very forceful, brutal measures. I mean, blowing up Nord Stream. Well, it's a great pleasure to be here. And as Misha said, it's been 16 years. I've had friends in Princeton from Hungary that were in the PhD program, in different PhD programs. This was just, I started there in September of 1989. And so one is a professor at Elton now. One other came back to do some shady business dealings here. One other was at another university. So a funny crowd. And we lived in a house with 4 PhD students. One of my roommates was Hungarian. And I must say, when the Hungarian crowd came, that was always the best parties. So, but this is a long time ago. So thank you for having me. I was branded as an economics expert, which I certainly am, or I run equity funds or a stock analyst, but I'm going to talk more about the broad world system and how it's changing. I mean, if we do a competitiveness talk, I wasn't informed about the talk. Misha told me, you hold this talk, you come please. No, not you, not please, you come. And I came, of course. And so it's more about the changing of the world order. It's more geopolitical. So, of course, we can discuss the other things also later on. So I'll do some political and IR theory for quite a few of you. This will be nothing new, but for some it will be. So I think it's important to have the frame for what's happening in the world right now. I talk about the Trump government. I am a naturalized US citizen because I spent many years there and I voted for Trump 3 times, but some recent developments are not quite, are rather disappointing, I would say. But of course, it's still good that we had a change in government in the US. I'll talk briefly about Europe, Germany, and Hungary. I mean, it's really a broad picture. We can talk about competitiveness, about economics more later. So, yes, this is the matrix, of course, the red pill and the blue pill. And to start with this, I've taken the red pill a long time ago, but I'm ever getting more red pilled as days go by. I mean, we now have the Epstein files and all this stuff, and things are happening that even I would not have thought possible, but they are open now. And no, I'm not, we'll get into this later. So this is this book, which made me kind of known in Germany and internationally. And then in 2017, I was a member of the CDU, the governing party, but when I said I'm going to vote AfD, of course, that was the end of my public career in Germany, but was not always easy, but it was the right path to choose. And then in 22, of course, the AfD proposed me for the office of president. I got second most votes. Of course, it was not possible to win that, and there was a lot of, let's say, defamation and pressure, but it was the right thing to do. So anyway, I predicted the system crash around 2008. I predicted the subprime and the global economic crisis, and I talked about, in 2006, about deglobalization. In 2006, I mean, globalization really was almost a gospel. Thomas Friedman from the New York Times wrote about the world is flat. We're so interconnected. I mean, we're ever growing closer together. And I said, no, there will be globalization. And I said, periods of turbulent change are followed by periods of calm, boom by bust, peace by war. And the editor at the time wanted to put out this sentence, said, you cannot say this anymore. I mean, this is not our times. I said, yes, this will come. And now we have it. And that's not some guesswork, but that's sound international relations theory. So in some ways, Philip Pilkington, who was at the Institute for Foreign Affairs, wrote this book last year, The Collapse of Global Liberalism, which is a nice supplement. I mean, it's a very good book, and I very much recommend reading it. So I said in 2016, when I was still with the German mainstream media, I worried about peace in Europe. Of course, we already had the Euromaidan, and just like Versailles after 1919. So Europe is in a different and difficult position.
Liebe Zuschauer, es tut mir leid, dass ich dieses Video an dieser Stelle unterbrechen muss, aber ich habe eine wichtige Information für Sie. Wie Sie wissen, ist Bargeld gedruckte Freiheit und es steht gerade unter Druck, denn die Politik und auch große Finanzkonzerne wollen an das Bargeld ran, wollen das Bargeld verbieten und dahinter stecken noch viel weitreichendere Entwicklungen in unserem Banken- und Finanzsystem. Und wenn Sie dieses Thema interessiert und Sie erfahren möchten, was das für Auswirkungen hat auf Ihre persönliche Vermögensplanung, dann laden Sie sich gern unseren Spezialreport herunter, Angriff auf das Bargeld. Da erfahren Sie mehr zu diesem brisanten Thema und können auch einschätzen, was das Ganze für Ihre persönlichen Finanzen bedeutet. Ich wünsche Ihnen jetzt noch viel Spaß mit dem restlichen Video. Es würde mich sehr freuen, wenn Sie den Spezialreport herunterladen. Auf gute Investments.
And this is what you referred to, Misha. It's the Weltsystemcrash, which is basically an update I'm giving today on the ideas developed in that book. And we have, of course, increasing debt and financialization of the global financial system. We have the rise of China, the relative decline of the United States. We have a decline of the middle class. We have surveillance capitalism and totalitarian tendencies in the West. And the question is, how is the reset going to look like? So that's basically what I'm going to talk about today. Ray Dalio, the hedge fund billionaire, probably 30 billion or so, 2 years later wrote about the changing world order, and both books complement each other very nicely. So Weltsystemcrash is about the theory, and Ray Dalio writes about, or had a lot of empirical data, so how nations rise and fall when an empire declines or a nation declines, is past its prime, what is going to happen. So this is also a good book to read. And my predictions in 2019 were 3 scenarios. One is a new Cold War, creation of a US-dominated Western bloc and a bloc dominated by China. Status of Russia and India still open. This was 2019, and in between it looked as if we were driving Russia completely into the Chinese bloc, but now it's looking a bit bitter. Competition of systems as well as propaganda and proxy wars. Probability high. So this was my most likely scenario, and it's on page 398 in the book. And it's more or less independent blocs. But societies can become totalitarian in their competition, and competition could escalate to war. Of course, we're still not over the risk of a big war. The Russian Foreign Ministry just published that France and Britain are working on arming Ukraine with a nuclear weapon. Make look like Ukraine developed it itself, so we'll see how that goes. And this just came out today or yesterday. And we have a stable multipolar or Großraum order, according to Carl Schmitt, which would have a more Western pole, like the Western Hemisphere, the US, a Chinese pole, and a more or less independent Europe, which would be my dream scenario, but it's highly unlikely. It's gotten ever more unlikely. I go over this and go into some IR theory. So I really base myself on the realist school of international relations, Thucydides, Machiavelli, Hobbes, Mearsheimer, Schmidt, Haushofer, Kissinger, Brzezinski. States do matter. It's not all about global liberal internationalism institutions. I mean, there are national interests. States are relevant actors today, some more relevant than others. But even as a small state, you can, if you have a smart policy, you can do good policy. And as a medium state, if you have a bad policy, you do bad policy. So states do matter, and it's about power, it's about relative power, it's about prestige, it's not about wealth. I mean, international politics is a game of prestige and power and hierarchy. And there needs to be, there's Mearsheimer, he was a big figure even when I was studying at Princeton, and he's of course a very outspoken critic of the war in Ukraine and Western approach to it. So we connect well, and we have occasional talks. Incredibly disciplined. He's 78 or 79 now, and full workload. I mean, one can only respect and admire that. So Robert Gilpin, who taught at Princeton at the time, really provided some framework of hegemonic rise and decline. There needs to be one central power or two central powers to stabilize the international system. And I quote Keynes, who I actually like pretty much. The great events of history are often due to secular changes in the growth of population and other fundamental economic causes, which, escaping by their gradual character the notice of contemporary observers, are attributed to the follies of statesmen or the fanaticism of atheists. So it's the big economic shifts, the power shifts, that really shape policy, not so much what individual policymakers do. Of course, individual policymakers can mess up, they can do well, but those underlying secular changes are very, very important. Could say a lot more about Keynes, but we don't really have the time for that. So the hegemonic cycle, really. There's a large superiority of a power due to accrued political, economic, societal advantages. The US after 45, England around 1900, or in the 19th century, more 1900 is too late already. So that hegemon sets the rules. It's not international law, it's the law as set by the hegemon, more or less in agreement with the others. And we have a hegemonic phase, which is the hegemon sets the rules, but everybody benefits to a certain extent. There's stability. There's a huge power differential. It's a legitimate order. And then the hegemon gets used to its privileges and new powers rise, and the hegemon defends its role increasingly aggressively. And then we have multipolarity, maybe instability, maybe war. So we're clearly at phase 4, 5 now. And we see how this goes. And that's the basic dynamic that drives the book or my predictions and so on and so forth. So, conspiracy theory. I would say I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but I'm a conspiracy diagnostic. So I diagnose conspiracies, I don't theorize about them. And the first one was Thucydides, the Athenian general who was banned from Athens during the Peloponnesian War. And if you're banned, I mean, it extremely enlarges the mind and your perspectives. So if you're out of the current sphere, you have a look from outside. So this is one of the dialogues, and really the Peloponnesian War is one of the, for me, the first real work of political science, because it just does not only describe what is, but the motives behind the actors and even how they try to sell it. So the propaganda they're doing. So the Athenians say to the Melians in the famous Melian dialogue, since you know as well as we do that right as the world goes is only in question between equals in power, while the strong do what they can and the weak suffer what they must. So right is relative. Powerful nations will do what they want to do. We see that with the US, we see that with other powerful nations. It's of course not such a comfortable position for smaller nations to be in, but again, there's room for skillful diplomacy. But also it was the rise of Athens and the fears that this rise created with the Spartans that made war inevitable. Thucydides. So here we have China surpassing the US in purchasing power parity around 2016. It's not only that China, technology, patents, it's a close second, and in many fields it has outrun the US. So it's not just sheer productive power, manufacturing. If you look at world manufacturing, this is even more unequal. Even a bigger share of world manufacturing is in China. Technology is very advanced. And that of course creates fear in the Americans or in the US. And as I said, I have the US citizenship, but that is the fundamental dynamic driving everything down to the Ukraine war, to everything that is happening. This is the one fundamental thing that is happening in the world that is pretty much responsible for many secondary phenomena. Here we see the naval power. This thing is a few years old. It's maybe 6-7 years old, but by 2030, China will have surpassed the US, or will be equal. And it already has 3 aircraft carriers. The first one they purchased as scrap from Ukraine in the 90s and said, we're going to make a swimming casino, which of course didn't. They made an aircraft carrier out of it. But so they learned, and so naval power is rising, and we see this right now in the Strait of Hormuz and in Iran. I would say that without the Chinese-Russian exercises there would have already been a bombing of Iran. So, and then Trump is probably still, maybe the decision has been made by now, I hope not, but we'll see. So the balance of power is adjusting. Of course, this was one major cause for the First World War. Here we see the Kriegsmarine, the German war navy and the Royal Navy, and Germany was rearming, and that of course in a way made the British very nervous, and so they created the conditions for 1914, I would say. Graham Allison, the longtime dean of the Kennedy School, wrote this book in 2019, Are China and America Destined for War? He says there's a 2/3 probability, 1/3 at least we have hope. But it's that same dynamic that drives world politics right now. There's this thing with land and sea powers. The US mostly relies on regime change and bombing countries. China mostly relies on infrastructure investments. Of course, both are there to gain influence. And that is also, we have this thing about the world island, Halford Mackinder, about the geographical pivot of history in 1904. He is a geographer. He made this speech to the Royal Geographic Society. And he said England cannot rule the heartland. This is the world island, and whoever dominates the world island will dominate the world. So England cannot do that, but what we can do is create unrest in the rim and prevent any power from dominating this world island. And so that's how we can preserve our primacy. Well, I guess he was, afterwards he was not so much in favor in England, and he was accused of cooperating too closely with Germany. I don't think that's the case, but I think he was just too blunt and too open about English diplomacy, and that didn't do him well. And the US, in many ways, has become an aggressive hegemon in decline. My friend Andy Bacevich, director of the Center of International Relations at Boston University, who I taught for a few years, was a tank officer in Germany. One of his sons died in Iraq. He was an officer himself. He wrote this book, American Empire, in 2003. Brzezinski, of course, with his grand chessboard, or Robert Kaplan wrote a book 20, 25 years ago, Warrior Politics. So, how leadership demands a pagan ethos. I mean, this is the US neocons, so very aggressive. I quote Bacevich, to overcome obstacles, for example, political instability or the rejection to follow the norms of an open world order, American political actors increasingly resort to force, even while they're emphasizing their peaceful intentions. And also in the 1990s, this is not the 2020s, but the 1990s, the willingness of America to apply political force to achieve political objectives, military force, of course, as a typo, to apply military force to achieve political objectives reached new heights. This is 30 years ago. And of course, it has even become more aggressive. Of course, if you look at the interventions after this is in the Cold War, and when you think there was a new world order, Fukuyama and so on and so forth, the end of history, well, that didn't age well. So after the Cold War, there were many more interventions, and this is just until 2015. Then we have, of course, mass migration as a weapon, as a political weapon, as it has been used for millennia, I would say. You can go back to the Bible and before. Mass migration is a political weapon, and 2015 was planned. I've collected lots of evidence now that this was very deliberately planned and steered. And Kelly Greenhill from Cornell wrote this book about weapons of mass migration, forced displacement, coercion, and foreign policy. And it was published at Princeton University Press about 12, 14 years ago. Anyway, a little nice anecdote. The book was translated into German, as was Brzezinski, The Grand Chessboard, by a publisher I know pretty well. And both sold very well in German, but after 2 editions, the American publishers both revoked their licenses. So it's not available in German anymore. So the business, these were very well-selling books, but they're not available anymore. So because this is too close to the truth, so you just hide it. So let's look at the Trump government. And I voted for him 3 times. In March 2016, I came out publicly in the Vienna Trade Fair with Armin Wolf, the chief reporter of the ORF. I was in a panel, and there's 500 people there, and I said, I'm going to vote for Trump. He's my peace president. So there was quite some laughter in the hall. And of course, in the first term in office, he says himself he didn't know how Washington operated. He came from outside. You have to basically put in about 10,000 people into the government because we have a rotating system of government. This dates back to Andrew Jackson in the early 1830s, who introduced the spoil system. Every president brings in a few thousand of his own supporters. The other ones get parked at the foundations and so on. So it's a rotating system. Anyway, so first time Trump didn't know. Now he said he knows. And then, of course, he was, for the whole 4 years, he was under pressure. There was a Russia hoax. So Obama illegally spied on him even before he was elected. Lots of things that will still come up, hopefully. So, and then of course, there was January the 6th, where we know many things about now, which we didn't know then. And so this is an amazing comeback. The man is superhuman in his resilience, although the last couple of months I see some slippage, I must say, but this doesn't distract from the truly amazing energy that he has. And of course, he came in with government reform, drained the swamp. Now he wanted to publish the Kennedy files and Epstein files. So I'm going to talk a bit about those 3 fields and what's happened here in my assessment. I'm going to talk a bit about Europe, Germany, and finish with Hungary. Extremely resilient, amazing. So I really thought this would be a transformative presidency. I mean, there's people in there with own standing. Elon Musk, who didn't have to be there. Elon Musk really got on board after Butler, Pennsylvania, after the assassination attempt. He said, I'm going to serve. And Elon Musk really had lots of disadvantages from joining it. He said, we must win Pennsylvania, we must win Michigan or Minnesota, or both. And so Musk joined in. And really, without Musk, I think Trump would not have been elected. There's RFK Jr., also high-profile person, left the Democratic Party to join the Trump team. Tulsi Gabbard, who was a presidential candidate in the primaries for the Democratic Party, complaining about the Democratic Party having become a warmongering party of the rich. J.D. Vance, fascinating person, and also Kash Patel. Well, so that was my hope for the second term. And quite a bit of that has vaporized, I must say. There's still some left, but so for fields, yes, wokeness and freedom of speech. I guess there's a lot of progress in my world philosophy. I mean, others might see it differently, but on his first day he said in government buildings there's only going to be two genders, men and women. I find that perfectly reasonable. Others might not, but also freedom of speech. So there's indeed progress here. Government reform, deep state. I'm going to talk a bit about trade and economics and security strategy and geopolitics. So with the government reform, I also had high hopes. With Musk on the team, that would be great. But so Musk and his young techno nerds started to work on US aid, and they had completely crazy items. What they did, they connected the expenditure to the actual checks going out. So the budget items to the actual expenditure. And governments, I'm not too deep in the Hungarian system, but governments all over the world don't do that. I mean, they fight about the budget items, but how it's spent once it's allocated to that department is not so clear. And so Musk checked that. And so we have things like transgender operas in South America and so the things that a development agency should do. Of course, and US aid is now dismantled. The remains are being put into the State Department. But of course, US aid always was, let's say, covert or a cover for CIA operations. Because of course, with those things you influence governments, you promote the opposition and stuff like that. And so that went at the heart of the deep state. I mean, Trump, in his, let's say, businessman's view, said, let's get rid of foreign aid. We don't need that. Yeah, very simple. That was his thinking. Of course, he went at the heart of the deep state. And so immediately you saw things about his team, alliances, some of those team members they're too young, they're too techno-nerd. I mean, there's nothing techno-nerd if you really follow the money. And so government reform stopped after that, in that sense. I mean, he removed quite a lot of general attorneys and attorneys that were put in by the previous administrations, and the fight is now going over the judges. I mean, the US really has a prehistoric legal system, and unfortunately we're taking it over to some extent in Europe. That legal system dates back to the pre-industrial era, as same as the Constitution, so it's not a model for modern state, but there it is, and of course it's sacred to Americans. And then, of course, Trump signed off on the big, beautiful bill, $5 billion more debt overnight. And my reading of it is that he simply wanted to have Congress behind him, didn't want to fight over that. And of course that made Elon Musk, who I think really believed that he could reform government with Trump. That made him leave. And They clashed in between. Musk said, okay, time to carry out the big one or pull out the big one. Trump is in the Epstein files. He deleted that later, but now we know, of course, he is in. To what extent, we don't know. They've made peace, meanwhile, so they have reconciled, but that was a deep disappointment for Musk, I would think. So government reform has not gone far. Freedom of speech, this is J.D. Vance last year at the Munich Security Conference. It was so good to watch our Western European leaders at that conference. It was really balm for the soul, I must say. So we have Nord Stream. This is, well, let's see. Okay, let's go into trade and economics first. So these are three pictures. You probably know all three or two of them. The first one is Karl Marx, the famous English economist, as Oswald Spengler would say, because his system basically described the realities in England, not in Germany. As, by the way, Hayek and von Mises are English economists and not Austrian economists, but that's for the insiders. The second one is Adam Smith, of course, who didn't consider The Wealth of Nations his most important book. He said The Theory of Moral Sentiments is his most important book. And the third one is Friedrich List. So I'm not going to talk about the first two. One is the class perspective, class struggle. The second one is free trade. And the third one is List is the nation as an economic entity. And List was talking about and he was a German-American. I mean, tragic life, but it's fascinating life. He was talking about the production potential, the production forces, education, law, legal system, infrastructure, because Germany didn't have much. He was writing the first half of the 19th century. Germany didn't have, he was a dissident, he was incarcerated in Germany, then moved to the US, so whatever. So it's not free trade. I mean, nothing against free trade, but it's the system of productive forces that really sets certain economies straight. And I'm not going to read this, but Keynes did a brilliant essay on national self-sufficiency, which is not complete self-sufficiency, but let's say national self-sufficiency as one goal in 33, which is worth reading, because he said, it does not seem obvious that free trade is promoting peace. And now we want war, so we cut off free trade with Russia, for example. So, I mean, it's these arguments tend to get confused. So it's something I would point your attention to. There may be some financial calculation which shows it to be advantageous that my savings should be invested in whatever quarter of the habitable globe shows the greatest marginal efficiency of capital or the highest rate of interest. But experience is accumulating that remoteness between ownership and operation is an evil amongst relations among men, likely or certainly in the long run to set up strains and enmities which will bring to naught the financial calculation. Interesting essay. So I put List in here in, let's say, as a basis of the economic policies of Donald Trump. He wants to bring industry back up, very much America first. But the first one is Alexander Hamilton, with a system of national manufacturers and protective tariffs to emancipate the young US economy from Britain. And List drew upon Alexander Hamilton and William McKinley. Then in 1897 to 1901, he was assassinated, was the one who put in place very high tariffs. So Trump is dreaming about, we're going to finance the government budget by tariffs, which of course in today's world is impossible, because at that time the government budget was at 4% of GDP, now it's at 30. But these are, so to say, the economic nationalists, although nationalism to me is too harsh a term, and they stand in before Trump. And one could, so he had this on April 2nd last year, Liberation Day, tariffs which were taken back. So it's very difficult to follow Trump's tariff policy. He's putting some out, then he's taking them back, he's putting them out. Now we have this thing before the Supreme Court. But it's clear that he uses it as an economic weapon. And they could go up very high, even higher than the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act of the early 30s. And you can criticize Trump for many things, but not for inconsistency in his foreign economic policy. This is his first one-page public announcement or public advertisement in the New York Times in 1987, where he was talking about foreign policy, and he was talking about make the allies pay, impose tariffs. We're paying for Mexico's and Japan's security. So make them pay, impose tariffs. This is a businessman's and it's a mercantilist view of trade, and a simple view, but maybe effective. So, and this has been in his head forever. There's nothing, no things here, but the tactics, and he's putting out things, he's withdrawing it. That is sometimes a bit confusing and quick. But the U.S. current account balance is tanking. It's below 5% of GDP. It's going ever down. He's dreaming of getting it in order by imposing tariffs, but about very, very forceful, brutal measures. I mean, blowing up Nord Stream, I'm coming back to that later, and then exporting US LNG to Germany and having a German political class that applauds it and supports it and doesn't talk about Nord Stream. That is for me as a German, is quite depressing. But so maybe he's able to reverse this, but we don't see this now. We don't see it with a budget deficit. We don't see it with a current account deficit. Those things are still tanking, so the economic indicators are still not very good. And the interest on the federal debt then is exploding, which of course is also quite concerning. We're now at 120, 125% of GDP, which is about the level of the US federal debt at the end of World War II. And it took about 30 years to get rid of that through inflation higher than interest rates. So, by the way, I mean, Trump himself refers to William McKinley as one of the presidents he respects. McKinley and Alexander Hamilton, by the way, both got assassinated. He also said that once. But William McKinley also was the president under which the US empire took off. The Spanish-American War, the Philippines, these things. So are they presidents of empire? The Monroe Doctrine of 1823 is, of course, overinterpreted. The Monroe Doctrine in its original content says no European powers shall intervene in the Western Hemisphere. Not we own the Western Hemisphere. Well, but it's been taken further. But then removing presidents or doing economic measures is also nothing new. I think it was under Roosevelt when Panama didn't pay for its taxes that he sent in the Marines to basically occupy the customs houses until the thing was paid. So this is nothing new. So let's talk a bit about the security doctrine and geopolitics. The new security doctrine, of course, says we will be in a multipolar world. We will be selective. We will work selectively with European powers. We'll see how that works. Of course, Trump has no respect for our current leadership in Western Europe. You could see that when Macron and Starmer and Merz were all seated like schoolboys in front of his desk in the Oval Office. It was an interesting picture. So basically it's bilateralism, and we'll see if that bilateralism is going to destroy Europe, the EU, which could be a good thing. We'll see. We'll see where this goes. I mean, lots of things are in motion, but if Trump or the Trump administration offers concessions to individual bigger European nations. They might break out of the common trade policy. They might do bilateral deals. That's the end of much of what the EU was about. Then it can only basically, let's say, control and suppress its own citizens. And that's why they're going so fast with the digital euro, for example, which is supposed to be there by 2029. I just revised a book on it. It's going to come out in 2 or 3 months in German. So, but we clearly see a very aggressive unilateralism. I mean, of course, Greenland, yes, maybe he meant it, but with Trump, you don't know, is it PR? Is it just setting tones, diverting attention? I mean, it's suspicious when both Barack Obama in a recent podcast and Donald Trump talk about aliens and make that a topic. So the question is this attention management? And of course, if you start to look at the Epstein files, which I'm not going to dig into today, but it's terrible. I mean, it's the amount of penetration, the amount of human depravity is just mind-blowing. So we have a very aggressive security doctrine, which we'll see if peace can be maintained in the Middle East. I think it's 50-50. I'm quite grateful for the Chinese and Russian warships that are doing exercises there, but we'll see how that plays out. The uprising has passed, and now it's 2 months later. We see very aggressive use of foreign economic policies. Of course, you cannot do everything by foreign economic policies. Even Joe Biden said, please move to Germans, companies come here, we have cheaper energy. I mean, so, but it's clear that there's a renewed interest on the Western Hemisphere, on Greenland, and on working bilaterally with European countries, which of course is a big chance. And I mean, the current government and hopefully future government in Hungary is doing this very smartly, using that leverage. I mean, without the Trump administration, it would be much more difficult. So that is a great plus, but I am allowed hopefully a very critical view of some of the other things, because this thing has gone off. I mean, government reform, 0. Transparency, 0. Stopping the war machine, 0. So, I mean, this is pretty disappointing for me, because I really thought there was a transformative businessman coming in, and he was talking consistently about this for 8 years. And this is actually in March or April 2016 when the American elites turned against Trump, because he was in one of those talk shows with 3 hosts, and he defended himself pretty clearly. And he said, when it was about Syria, and he said, we don't know who these weapons are going to. They go to ISIS terrorists. We fund ISIS terrorists. I mean, that clip sold me on Trump. Of course, now he's recognizing al-Yolani, and he's claiming that he essentially put him there. And of course, what's happening in Syria is terrible. Assad was not a nice man, but we had relatively religious and business tolerance. Politically, of course, not. And now it's much worse. So let's look at Europe. If you haven't seen this card, this is actually the oldest known depiction of Europe as a political entity. It was done by Johannes Putsch in Retz, so in Austria, in 1534. And it's Europe, and it's accompanied with an invocation of Karl V and Ferdinand I to save Europe from her enemies. This was, of course, the time of the Turkish siege and so on and so forth. And Europe is the innocent virgin that is being threatened by internal and external enemies. The crown, the head is Spain. Then on the left-hand side, and then you see France, and the heart is really Germany and Austria. The island on the shoulder is not really part of Europe. This is Great Britain or England. And of course, any decent Englishman would say, no, we're not the continent. I mean, of course, that could totally reflects the own perspective. So, and down there then, Europe stands on Russia. I mean, so that's the basis. So it's upside down in that way. And so we have multiple divisions. We have North-South, we have the latest since the Euro crisis, but even before, we have large countries, small countries. We have East and West, especially since the Iraq War. This was the death of the European convent when about 10 Central Eastern European politicians that were all US trained stood up, we stand with the US on this war. And Schröder and Chirac tried to do a European independent policy line, but that was the end of that. We have divided societies, poor, rich. We have globalists and populists. Of course, we have Ukraine dividing Europe. We have Gaza dividing Europe. So there's multiple divisions here. And of course, we have multiple construction errors. We don't have real parliament. We cannot elect the commission. It's imposed. We saw that with Ursula von der Leyen. My theory why she got there, I mean, she couldn't stay in Germany because, of course, the corruption in the defense ministry. And the other theory is that never, ever should a German be head of the European Central Bank. France would not allow that. It's my theory, at least. As well as when, let's say, in 2003, the head of Deutsche Börse wanted to acquire London Stock Exchange, Werner Seifert. And it made perfect business sense. But how naive can you be to believe that the German stock exchange could acquire the London Stock Exchange? But only, I would say only a German can be that naive, but whatever. So it's very unequal weights of votes. There's a violation of one citizen, one vote. I mean, it's the relationship between Cyprus and Germany is probably 60-1. So a Cypriot vote is about 60 times a German vote. We are very prone to lobbyism. And the idea was, and I was a student at the time, to start to build Europe through harmonization, the Delors plan, which at the time sounded like a good idea. And Delors is a good man. I mean, he's basically deeply disappointed about many things. But of course, that wouldn't work. In retrospect, this was a big mistake because if you have regulations on everything, it works very asymmetrically. It is a big burden on the countries that follow regulations 150%, like Germany, and a lesser burden on countries that follow regulations 50%. So it's about the implementation. And then we had the widening before the deepening. And of course, we have the euro. And this was my job talk at Boston University in April 1998. I was a euro skeptic even then. So it is a misconstruction. It will last a maximum of 10 years. Then there will be a crisis. But the second part of this was true. This happened, but the second part of my predictions went pretty wrong. So then the Europe of Brussels will basically an existential crisis and it will collapse or something like it. And this is positive because Europe can do better without this EU. And post-crisis Europe will give itself a better structure. But what I didn't see at the time, and this, forgive me, this is 28 years ago, is that the EU would become so intrusive, so aggressive, that so much state planning with the Euro Rettung, with the Euro packages that were introduced after 2011. And of course the Euro, so to say, saving of the Euro, which is a misnomer because it was a debt crisis of the southern countries. The Euro had nothing to do with it. The second propaganda myth was that the Euro would save peace in Europe. Well, we have the Euro, we don't have peace. But people in West Germany believed it, but this Euro crisis was basically the birth idea of the AfD, of the only popular opposition party that now is the largest party actually, but it's being repressed in many ways. I'm pretty close to the party. So they put me up as a presidential candidate in 22, so I had second most votes, which was not an easy thing to do because it came at high costs, but was the right thing to do. And so we still have the euro, and now that's basically igniting the last stage, the digital euro, and then there's total control. So I hope something will happen before that. Of course, we had those different approaches. England, basically free trade area. France, an association of states, is intergovernmental cooperation and some central functions. And Germany thought we really get a federal, subsidiary, democratic Europe with a real parliament, pretty much like the Federal Republic. I mean, some central functions and economics and business and culture and all that on the level of the nation state. But of course, France prevailed, so we have this EU is basically a French custom-tailored suit. If we thought it couldn't get any worse, it did. He basically is totally dependent on the SPD, his coalition partner, so the basically the co-pilot steers the ship and the captain is just figurehead. And he's also dependent on the Greens. He's doing green policy, he's doing debt, he's doing war. I mean, I've known him for a long time. We're from the same region. And I had very low expectations, and he magnificently underbid those. I mean, this is just amazing. He broke every promise he made. So we'll see how long the government lasts. I hope not very long. But we are continuing with the deindustrialization. We have more taxes on Germans. We want to send more money to Ukraine. We have this new debt. It's just mind-blowing. But he's always been, he sold himself as a man of the people, but he's always been a lobbyist and basically a BlackRock employee. I mean, he's been out of BlackRock, but of course he still has his buddies there, and this is his mindset. Of course, we have Nord Stream. I mean, a country that doesn't speak up. And basically, Joe Biden made that announcement on the 7th of February 22. He said, if Russia invades Ukraine, there will be no Nord Stream. And Olaf Scholz, the then chancellor, stood right next to him, said nothing. I mean, that is basically suicide. So Radek Sikorski from Poland said, thank you, USA. In the summer, Duda had demanded before it was exploded, he had demanded to tear down Nord Stream. So, I mean, if a country doesn't promote its own interests, then it's pretty bad. So I quote Kissinger, to be an enemy of America can be dangerous, but to be a friend is fatal. Depends, of course, on the situation. But, I mean, Kissinger jokes, and this is attributed to him by William Buckley, who was a very serious journalist, so I'm pretty sure he said it at some point, but I quote my favorite philosopher, Oswald Spengler, the renunciation of world politics does not protect from its consequences. So you can put your head in the sand, but the thing is going to happen anyway. So let's stop with Hungary briefly, and I think I pointed the very big picture, but I think we're all very happy on the conservative side that there is Hungary, and Hungary is more or less taking over the role of Switzerland in former times to some extent. The Swiss have a government form that is not suited to today's very competitive and very tough international environment, because the central government is very weak, and for a small state to survive in today's world, you need a strong central government. Otherwise, you have this lobbyism thing coming in and stuff. So in the sense, I see Hungary replacing Switzerland in the concert of European powers. And I'm personally very grateful that Hungary is here and that Viktor Orban is here. And I've checked for and that also shows what skillful diplomacy and policy can do even in such a turbulent time. I mean, if power is wielded wisely and strategically, yes, even small powers or medium powers can change or can influence things. And I checked my X account on the number of reposts or retweets in former times I've done of Viktor Orban's statements, and there's quite a few actually. So I probably should write a bill to the Hungarian government or something like that. So this one I retweeted on January 1st, and it's Hungary is not leaving the West. We are staying to change it. We want an alliance guided by common sense. Brussels must serve the nations, not play puppeteer. We will fight for sovereignty, for cooperation instead of bowing to an empire, and for Europe that chooses, and so on and so forth. So this was early this year, and I checked another one from the summer of 24, and there I said, the Budapest newspaper or Zeitung is actually taking up my proposal of giving the Peace Nobel Prize to Viktor Orban. He announces to leave NATO if his peace initiative is failing. So I said, God save Viktor Orban. This was almost 2 years before you invited me, so there's no suspicion that this was done, whatever. You can check it. Long time. Anyway, so I'm quite happy that some nations in Europe retain common sense, and we hope that the big ones will follow. Thank you very much.